She said it without flinching. Not during a fight, not in the privacy of our home, but while smiling across a table at a charity dinner. Her eyes stayed on the man sitting beside her, our mutual friend, or so I thought. The sentence was for me, but the performance was for him. This version of you does not scare me. Her tone was light, effortless, like she was commenting on the wine pairing. A joke meant to land gently, but her gaze flicked toward me the moment the laughter stopped. She was measuring my reaction. I took a sip of my drink and said nothing. That silence was intentional, because the version of me she remembered, the one she had learned to manage, would have tried to explain himself. That man would have offered reassurance, asked for clarity, maybe even smiled to keep things smooth. But that version no longer existed. When we got home, she did not bring it up. Instead, she peeled off her coat with careful ease, hung it neatly by the door, and asked if I wanted tea. I told her no. She made some for herself anyway, moving through the kitchen like everything was in balance. As she leaned against the counter, blowing steam from her mug, she asked casually, "Did you enjoy the dinner?" I kept my tone even. "The food was fine." She smiled faintly. "You were quiet tonight." I did not respond to that either. Letting her own words hang in her memory would be more effective than pretending they had not landed. The silence stretched long enough that she finally added, "It was just a joke." There it was, the clarification. Not an apology, not even a walk back. Just a subtle reframe in case I chose to confront her. But I had no intention of confronting her. Not yet. I nodded once and walked past her into the study. The evening had revealed more than she realized. The glances from her friend, the small shift in tone when she spoke about our shared investments, the way she had casually reintroduced herself to someone we had known for years as just Elise. Each of those details meant something. It was not one moment that raised suspicion. It was a pattern. I sat at my desk and opened my calendar. Over the past 2 months, she had added 6 new events to our shared schedule, none of which included me. Private lunches, personal branding sessions, creative alignment workshops, all innocuous words with no anchor, each one falling conveniently during times I had critical client meetings. 2 weeks ago, she had mentioned launching a personal brand campaign. "It will be good for us," she had said, brushing it off as something adjacent to our company's public image. I had agreed. I had no reason to doubt her, at the time. Now that phrase, "This version of you does not scare me," did not sound like a jab. It sounded like a declaration. She had already adjusted to a future that did not require me. I pulled out my notebook and made a single entry under a new heading: "Observe, do not react." Then I wrote the line she had whispered across the table, quoting her word for word. This was not the first time she had tested a version of reality in public, but it would be the last time she did so without consequence. She walked into the study 10 minutes later, mug still warm in her hand. She stood in the doorway, casual but posed. "Are we good?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I looked up from the page and matched her tone. "Why would we not be?" Her smile returned, practiced and composed. "I just felt a shift tonight, that is all." I closed the notebook calmly. People shift. That does not always mean something is wrong. She studied me for a beat longer than usual, then gave a small nod and walked back down the hall. I watched her go, the echo of her heels fading into the bedroom. She believed she had delivered a warning. She believed she had shown dominance. But warnings only work when they reach the intended version of a person, and she had not yet met mine. The shift began in small, social fractures, cracks that would look like coincidence to anyone not paying attention. A message left on read by a friend who once texted daily. A missed invitation to a mutual acquaintance's engagement party. An industry contact suddenly unavailable for a follow-up call after weeks of eager coordination. These were not random acts of distance. They were calibrated. 3 days after the dinner, I received a forwarded invitation from someone on our advisory board. It was a digital flyer, clean and minimalist, announcing an invite-only networking retreat. At the bottom of the list of featured guests, Elise, brand strategist and founder of EM Insight. The logo was unfamiliar. The email thread it came from was not meant for me. My contact had forwarded it without comment, assuming I already knew. The event was to be held in a private villa 2 hours outside the city. The date overlapped perfectly with the weekend she had told me she was visiting her aunt for recovery time. I did not confront her. That night she brought home groceries and asked if I wanted to try a new pasta recipe. I agreed, kept my voice neutral, and let her fill the room with surface-level updates. She described her day in soft tones, highlighted a new client who might be worth looping you into later, and mentioned she was thinking of doing a short cleanse before the trip. As she reached into the cabinet for spices, I asked, "Will your aunt be joining you for this wellness weekend?" She paused mid-reach, recovered smoothly. "Not this time. She's staying with my cousin, actually." I nodded and returned my attention to the cutting board. She did not know that her aunt and I had exchanged messages earlier that morning. A thank you note for the flowers I had sent after her recent surgery. She mentioned Elise had not called in weeks. Later that evening, while she showered, I opened her office drawer and found a printed schedule folded beneath her notebooks. The EM Insight logo marked the header. The schedule included round-table slots, guest lectures, and breakout sessions, all co-hosted by names I recognized from her professional circle, men and women who had once praised my firm, now quietly aligned with her new venture. She had not told me about this because it was not a collaboration. It was a separation. Still, I said nothing. The next morning, she offered me a seat on the balcony while she reviewed mock-ups for a campaign. "Want to help me decide between these taglines?" she asked, sliding her tablet across the table. The mock-ups were clean, bold. The logo matched the one from the retreat. I pointed to the one with the least emotional language. "This one feels grounded," I said. She smiled as she took the tablet back. "That is what I was thinking too." We sat there for another 20 minutes, sipping coffee, pretending we were aligned. But I had already begun the audit. On a private drive I kept off network, I started building a timeline. The events she logged in our shared calendar versus those she attended. The names she had introduced in passing: investors, consultants, former classmates. I created a map of appearances, social tags, background mentions. One name kept surfacing in quiet places: Cameron Vale, a publicist known for building high-profile exits disguised as self-discovery. She had once been linked to a viral campaign rebranding a CEO after a failed ethics scandal. I remembered Elise mentioning her over dinner months ago, calling her brilliant but cutthroat. Cameron had commented on 4 of Elise's recent posts, all supportive, all vague. That evening, I waited until Elise had gone to sleep before accessing the cache of high-resolution photographs she kept for marketing. In one folder labeled alternate versions, I found draft bios. One referred to her as founder and sole creative architect of the M Network. Another described a strategic departure from traditional partnership models. My name did not appear once. When I finally closed the folder and stepped into the hallway, the house was quiet. She had begun building a world in which I did not exist, and the people surrounding her had already started pretending that world was real. I did not expect the truth to arrive through a casual voice message, and I certainly did not expect it to come from someone who once said, "You two are the only couple I still believe in." But that was the thing about Elise's world. It was built so carefully, so convincingly, that even her closest allies sometimes forgot where their loyalties began. The message came late on a Wednesday evening. I had just returned from a brief out-of-state meeting, and my phone buzzed as I unlocked the front door. A voice memo from Tessa, one of Elise's former business mentors. It began with laughter, light, distracted. "Okay, so I am still a little buzzed, and I probably should not be saying this, but did Elise really not tell you about Portland? I mean, I assumed it was your idea, that beach property tour thing. You are always more discreet than her anyway, but if you were not with her..." The rest of the message was static. That sentence was enough. Elise had not mentioned Portland in over a year. The last time it came up, she was describing a client retreat she had attended alone, but she had never mentioned a beach property, and certainly not in the context of both of us. She was using my name, or more precisely, my identity. 2 hours later, I was on a plane. I booked it quietly, left no digital trace under our shared accounts. I told Elise I needed space to focus on a major restructuring meeting. She nodded, kissed me on the cheek, and wished me luck. There was no hesitation in her tone. She believed I would be gone long enough for her version of the story to remain intact. When I arrived in Portland, I went directly to the address I had pulled from a background scan of EM Insight's affiliate business filings. It was a mailbox rental office. Inside, the clerk confirmed the name Elise Monroe, but the surname was spelled differently. Elise Montreux, a subtle change, elegant, easy to miss. She had signed for documents under that name 3 times in the past month. One of them had been a business registration certificate. The other 2 had required identity verification, photocopies of identification bank statements. I requested a copy of the signature logs under professional credential pretext. The clerk hesitated, then gave me a timestamp printout. The handwriting was hers. Later that afternoon, I visited the brokerage firm listed on one of the mail pieces. I walked in wearing a tailored coat, calm expression, and the name of a business associate who had helped us with our first property years ago. It took less than 10 minutes to confirm what I needed. Elise, under the name Elise Montreux, had viewed 3 properties in the last 6 weeks. All were marked as dual occupancy investment evaluations. The notes from her last visit were chilling in their precision. Client indicated she is seeking a long-term base of operations for phase 2 of the venture. Husband will be managing other holdings, primary residence not shared, ownership to be structured under LLC. That evening, I returned to the hotel, sat in the corner chair, and stared at the window without seeing the skyline. She was not leaving me. She had already left, but she had not done it by packing a suitcase or changing her number. She had done it by slowly erasing me from the version of her life she was now preparing to make real. Not through confrontation, not through rupture, but through narrative control. The next morning, I placed a call to a discreet legal specialist, one who specialized in identity misuse and corporate veil breaches. I gave only the most essential information. She is using alternate versions of her name, building new business entities, using joint history as silent legitimacy. His response was crisp. She is building a stack. What kind? A soft identity stack. Enough to function, not enough to trigger enforcement. But if she is doing this in more than one state, it qualifies as multi-jurisdictional misrepresentation. I let that settle before I asked the next question. If there is another name tied to her already, what happens then? He did not ask what I meant. He simply said, then it is no longer strategy. It is verifiable deception. I ended the call and sat still, watching the hotel room blur around the edges. There was one more thing I needed to confirm, and I already knew where to look. I waited until I was back in our city before pulling the last thread. It had to be here, not in Portland. If I was right, the confirmation would exist under her original legal identifiers, the one she had used before she took my name. I sat alone in a private records office, surrounded by the static hum of data servers and the quiet tap of a clerk's keyboard. I had requested a comprehensive identity search through a contact I trusted implicitly. His work had saved one of my oldest clients during a hostile licensing conflict. He did not ask why I needed this. He only asked for accuracy. He returned an hour later with a printed folder and a flat voice. There is a record. I waited. She married in Oregon under a different name 4 years ago. The air in my lungs did not shift. I simply asked, "Is it active?" He nodded. No dissolution filed. No annulment. Legally, she never ended it. He opened the folder and slid the photocopy toward me. The signature was unmistakable. It was not just the shock of the document, it was the date. 3 months before we met. She had already been married when we were introduced. Every moment that followed, every vow, every shared account, every holiday with my family, had been layered on top of a lie so embedded it now looked like structure. She had married me while already married to someone else. But that was not the part that broke me open. It was the second address listed on the certificate, a forwarding location. It was my business address, my old one from a startup I had run briefly out of a loft before we merged with a larger firm. She had been following me before we met. That night I did not sleep. I returned home just past 11. The house was dark except for the bathroom light under the door. She was humming. The same soft melody she used whenever she was winding down after a long day of creative burnout. I listened to the sound, not for its tune, but for its audacity. She stepped out a minute later in a slate robe, her hair pinned back. She looked surprised. "I thought you were staying overnight." I kept my coat on. It ended early. She watched me carefully. You look tense, I shrugged. Long drive. She reached out and touched my sleeve, a soft gesture. Come to bed soon, I nodded once. In a minute. She walked down the hall, the fabric of her robe whispering along the floorboards. I sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the framed photo she had insisted we hang above the fireplace, one from a trip we took to Barcelona. I remembered the day clearly. The sun was brutal, the plaza crowded, but her smile in that image had been effortless. I now understood why. She had already secured the second foundation of her life. I had only been the overlay. The next morning I made 3 calls. The first was to the identity specialist. I authorized him to begin constructing a forensic timeline of her dual records. The second was to a discreet legal strategist who handled marriage-based deception and jurisdictional irregularities. I requested early-stage documentation protections and a priority claim on all shared asset lines. The third was to my assistant, who I trusted completely. I asked her to book me into the next EM Insight networking retreat under an alias, quietly and under independent credentials. When I arrived at the retreat 3 days later, Elise was standing on the patio in a bone-white blazer holding a champagne flute. She was mid-conversation with a young advisor I recognized from LinkedIn. I stayed at a distance, watching. She laughed when she introduced herself. Elise Montreux, strategic visioning, market restoration, social clarity architecture. The name did not belong to her, but the performance did, flawless. She had removed me from her story. Now it was time to remove the story from her. I chose the location carefully, not a courtroom, not a corporate event. A private dinner, social, intimate, curated by Elise herself. She had called it a celebration of transformation. Invitations had been hand-delivered to her curated list of allies, clients, and newly acquired influence. I received mine only because I had made sure of it. Through a shell RSVP, registered under a client alias she had long stopped paying attention to. The venue was a rooftop space, minimalist decor, strategic lighting, the kind of place designed to imply prestige without arrogance. She arrived late enough to be noticed, wearing ivory. Her hair swept back, her tone gracious as she floated from one cluster of conversation to another. When she saw me, her smile faltered for less than a second. Then it recovered. I was not expecting you, she said, tilting her head slightly. I held her gaze. I figured I owed it to your guests. Her eyes flicked toward a group nearby. Let us not do this here, I nodded. Agreed. I waited until dessert. The lights had softened, the wine was flowing, and Elise stood near the head of the table preparing to make a toast. She tapped her glass lightly, smiled at the room, and began speaking about reinvention, about the courage to redefine legacy. Her voice carried easily, clear. Controlled, she had rehearsed this. When she paused for breath, I stood quietly and stepped forward. I would like to add something, I said, my voice steady but low enough to draw focus. She blinked. Now is probably not the time. I ignored that. I turned toward the group, lifting a small folder from my coat. There is something I believe should be transparent, I said, placing the folder on the table. No raised voice. No accusation, just documents. Inside, 2 marriage certificates. Her 2 names. Her 2 lives stamped, verified. A murmur passed through the room. She tried to recover. That is a misinterpretation. I did not look at her. I placed a second page on the table. A timeline of overlapping residencies, business filings, and tax records. All matching, all legal, all traceable. Her voice rose just slightly. This is malicious. It is an attempt to derail progress, I spoke calmly. You built a life on 2 names, 2 legal identities. One of them already in a marriage you never ended, and you used mine to build the second. No one moved. Then came the final page, a notarized statement from the Oregon courthouse confirming the active status of the first marriage in the absence of a dissolution filing. The air changed. Not loud, not chaotic, just tight. Elise stepped back, her hands lightly touching the table. She turned toward her circle. There is context, she said, but no one asked for it. I picked up the folder, returned it to my coat, and stepped away from the table. She followed. Why would you do this here? She hissed. I did not raise my voice. You made this room your stage. I gave them your script. She stared at me, searching for a version of me that might still be manageable, but there was nothing left to manage. I walked past her and toward the elevator. Behind me, the conversation resumed, but not as it had before. There were no toasts now, no affirmations, only questions. She had curated this guest list with care, and now they were all witnesses. She had wanted a stage, she had built one out of lies, and I had let her stand on it just long enough for the lights to come on. The fallout began before I even made it home. An alert from my legal strategist came through as I crossed the bridge into the city. Her Oregon husband had filed an emergency petition to void their marriage. Grounds listed: legal misconduct, concealment, and multi-state identity manipulation. The filing timestamp was less than 2 hours after I laid the documents on that rooftop table. Elise had underestimated how quickly people react when reputation is on the line. He had been watching too, just not from where she expected. By morning I received 2 more messages. One from an investor Elise had been courting for her personal brand initiative. He thanked me for the clarity. The other came from a shared professional contact. She's suspended. The board acted fast. That was the nature of borrowed power. The second the story turned, it disappeared, but Elise was not finished. Not yet. 2 days later, a courier delivered an envelope to my firm. Inside was a legal document structured as a trust, a joint financial vehicle filed under our married name. I had never signed it, but my signature was on the page: unauthorized replication. It took less than an hour for my legal team to confirm the source of the document. She had filed it through a proxy firm weeks earlier. During the same period, she had been detoxing from screens. It granted her access to several of our shared financial holdings and rerouted a portion of future earnings into a private account masked through business reinvestments. She had prepared for her exit before the gala ever took place. But what she had not expected was that I had already placed alerts on every account connected to our joint filings. The moment the trust activated, it triggered a freeze. By noon, her access had been revoked, the proxy firm flagged, a cease and desist filed and countersigned. That night she texted me. The message was short: "We need to talk." I did not reply. An hour later: "This is not what you think." I turned off the phone. The following morning, I received word from the forensic accountant I had retained. The same account Elise had routed through the trust had attempted a private equity withdrawal 2 weeks prior to the gala. It failed, but the intent was documented. She had not just planned to leave. She had planned to leave with everything. Later that day, I drove past the villa where the retreat had been held. The banners were gone. The guest list removed from the event page. The EM Insight website redirected to a placeholder domain. I checked her professional social accounts. The comments had shifted, no longer applause but silence, and in a few places quiet retractions. Cameron Vale, the publicist who had once called her a voice of bold transition, had deleted all references to her. Elise had built her new identity on strategic anonymity. The moment the light touched it, it crumbled. But there was one consequence left to finalize. The forged trust filing included a small detail most would miss: a timestamp from a scan made in our home office. The same scanner she once used for travel itineraries, now tied to a document meant to rewrite our financial reality. I forwarded the metadata to our legal counsel. The filing was amended to include it as evidence. She had not only signed my name, she had done it while I was in the next room, building her pasta recipe, humming softly, asking about our weekend plans. That was not a mistake. It was calculation wrapped in calm. And now the calm was ending. She tried one more time. A week after the trust was frozen and the Oregon filing went public, a letter arrived at my office, handwritten, sealed in an envelope without return information. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. No greeting, no apology, just a line: "You do not understand why I did it." She was wrong. I understood too well. She did it because she thought silence was the same as surrender. Because she had mistaken my stillness for detachment when it had always been focus. That night she came to the house. She did not knock at first. I heard the soft rhythm of her heels outside on the stone steps, stopping just short of the door. I waited, watching from behind the glass as she adjusted her coat, checked her reflection in the darkened window, and finally reached for the bell. I opened the door without a word. Her voice was low, the kind people use when trying to sound gentle without seeming weak. I did not come to fight. I studied her posture, controlled, polished, but not steady. I know, I said. She held my gaze. I made mistakes. I shook my head once. You did not make mistakes, you made arrangements. She flinched, not visibly but internally, the way people do when they realize the performance no longer holds weight. I thought I was protecting myself, she said, stepping forward slightly. You seemed so far. My tone did not change. I was standing beside you. She looked past me, toward the living room we had once furnished together. The couch where she used to draft campaign briefs. The rug she insisted on shipping from Istanbul because it made the room feel earned. Can we talk inside? She asked. I stepped aside. She entered slowly, looking at everything as if she were trying to decide which details still belonged to her. She sat on the edge of the armchair, the one she always avoided because it was too firm for long conversations. Now she wanted it to anchor her. I do not know where to begin, she said. I folded my arms. Begin with the man you married before me, she inhaled. That was supposed to be over, but it was not. Her hands clenched slightly around her knees. I had planned to end it. You planned a lot of things. She leaned forward, her tone softening. This was never about hurting you. But it did, I said. You did. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was honest. She sat there for several seconds, breathing slowly, eyes cast down. Then she spoke again, barely audible. Are you going to destroy everything I built? I walked past her and picked up a small envelope from the entry table, the one that had arrived 2 days earlier. The final documentation from the asset proceedings. Stamped, sealed, confirmed. I do not have to, I said. You already signed the ruin yourself. She reached for the envelope, but I did not hand it to her. Instead, I placed it on the table beside her and stepped back. This is the part where you usually say something rehearsed, I said. A line about rebuilding or regret or starting over. She closed her eyes. I continued. But I am not looking for resolution. I am looking for distance. Her voice cracked just slightly. So that is it. Yes, I said. She stood slowly, her posture folding just enough to reveal the fracture. I never wanted to lose you, she said. I met her eyes. You never had me, you had access. She hesitated. What do I do now? You start from the truth, I said, for once. She nodded once, turned, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. I wish you had scared me, she said, not looking back. Then maybe I would have been more careful. I did not reply. She stepped outside. I closed the door behind her. That was not victory. It was not closure. It was acknowledgement. The version of me she remembered, pliable, hopeful, willing to wait, was gone. And in his place stood a man who had learned that silence is not absence. It is accountability. She had tried to build her freedom on borrowed identity. Now all she had left was her real name, and the weight that came with it.